Okay, so I've just got Photoshop open so we can go over the idea of print resolution. And so, as you have with all resolutions, you generally would measure them in dots per inch. And so just remember that you can see that anytime in Photoshop by going to the image menu and then image size. So if you're not using image size in Photoshop, you need to get into that habit of always checking your image size and being familiar with it. And so you can see you've really got two settings. You've got the width and the height, which are giving you the dimension setting, and then you've got the resolution. And they are interrelated, but you should also be thinking about them separately. And so 300 dpi is the correct resolution, but you can see there the width and the height are quite high in this section. So I've also got InDesign open, and we know that that's an A3 page. So to get the correct resolution, also the correct size with the correct resolution on this A3 page, we'll need to adjust that image. So you're always trying to achieve 300 dpi for print, and unless you've got a really expensive printer, you can go up to 600. But with the printers we've got here, and most printers you'll use, 300 dpi is going to be the maximum print resolution. So there's no need to go any higher. You can place higher resolution images into InDesign and scale them down, but it's a much better practice to get the resolution right before you place them. So on the in the image menu again, back to image size, then looking at the size there, we know it needs to fit on that A3 page, which is 420mm wide. So I'm going to tick resample, and then make sure I leave that resolution there on 300 dpi, and then change that width to less than 420. We've got to allow probably an area that's non-printable, unless we're doing full bleed, which we're not. So we'll say 380. And so then you can see it's reducing the total number of pixels. And you can tell that up the top from the image size. So it was 18 meg and it's going down to 11 meg. And that's one of the reasons it's good practice to get the resolution and the image size right before you place them into InDesign. When you have really high-res images that are really big, and then you place them into InDesign and scale them down, it's going to make your files still really large, and create other issues as well. So, so again, best to do it in advance. And so I'll just click OK, and it will make it a bit smaller because it is technically, it's less pixels. But I can still just zoom. I'm just holding down Alt. If you don't know that shortcut, Alt with the wheel lets you zoom just like Revit does. And so then I'm going to simply save that file. So is there another way you can think of setting the resolution and the image size before even having that in Photoshop? If we're creating this by rendering. Okay, so if you think about that setting, I'll just go back to Revit. So when you render in Revit, you have virtually the same options. So you could have done it, or I could have done it back here. So setting the width and the height combined with that resolution gives me the total image size. And so you can always do it, again, in advance in Revit. It's up to you. And oh yeah, that's a good point. So, okay, I can't do it at the moment because it's rendering, but basically you select the border of the render, yeah, and then you'll get the size crop button comes up on the ribbon to adjust it. Yeah, that's right, exactly. And that's really important because you need to know the width and the height in millimetres. And yeah, so that's a good point. You can only get to that by selecting that crop border, and then click on that size crop button. I'll show you in a minute once this finishes rendering. But again, if you forget, then you can do it in Photoshop as well. So I've got that done, and now I'm going to go across to InDesign. And so I know now when I go to File and choose Place, then I'll go and find that file. Retail Photoshop, there it is. And there's my Photoshop file. So I love this about InDesign, that you can place Photoshop files in, and I'll pick up the layers and everything. You'll see a lot of people from the old days will still flatten them before bringing them across to InDesign. It's just an old habit. You don't need to do that anymore. It makes the files a little bit smaller, but it's not necessary. And also you don't have the option of then having it linked. So you can see there I've got my my render with the line work, but then if I decide, say, that I don't want the line work anymore, I'll change my Photoshop file and I'll just save that. So now back into InDesign, and I'm going to, well, I'll just save this file as well. I'll just save it here actually. Okay, so now I'm just going to go to the window menu and bring up the links panel. And you can see there it's giving me a little warning symbol next to my Photoshop file to tell me that it's been modified. And it's simple. You just click on that to update it. Oh, there we go. So double click, sorry. And there we go. So you can see there it's brought across the change. And then I've decided, actually, I do want the line work. No problem. Back to Photoshop. Turn it on. Save it, back to InDesign, and you can see there it's giving me the warning again, double click, and line works back. So, works really well. And so then, again, the size is set perfectly because I've set that in advance in Photoshop. So that's best practice if you can get the size set there in Photoshop, because then the resolution will be exactly 300 dpi, and that's perfect for printing. But then I'm going to show you also how to scale it, because there'll be times when you forget or you just want to on the fly quickly adjust the size of your images in InDesign. So if I select that image there, you can see it's going to come up. I've just got the default selection tool there. So it's coming up with these handles on each side. And in most programs, if you were to stretch those, click and drag, it would stretch the image, but not in InDesign. In InDesign, it crops it because that's a frame. It contains the image. I'll undo that. And so if you want to scale the image and the frame together, there's a great option for that. It's down here, you've got the free transform tool. Now, unfortunately, you can't just live with that on all the time, because when you choose the free transform tool, you can't select other things. It locks your selection. But it's still a great tool, because now you'll see if I stretch the corner or the side, doesn't matter, it scales both together. So that can get you out of trouble. And so you can quickly adjust the size of all those things, and you can do it non-uniformly. If you want to make it much narrower, you can do that. So then, aside from placing images in InDesign, you'll mostly be using it to add text, and you've got all the great options for fonts that Adobe programs have. You get a lot more fonts usually than you'll have in the other Windows programs. And even though we can't do it here, on your own computers you can add as many fonts as you like, and I'd highly recommend you go and get some better fonts than the default Windows ones. Now, I'll just tell you as well, you can do Photoshop, you can do text in Photoshop as well, and it's not bad. It used to be a problem because it was it was all pixel based. So it was, all raster. So it was made up of pixels, which meant that your text changed depending on the resolution of your image. But they've had vector-based text in Photoshop for quite a while now. So if you want to do your text in Photoshop, you can. If you want to put labels over the top of your drawings like this. Shop. Interior, I don't know what we call that. Just zooming in there, you'll see, even though it does come up pixelated, when you change the resolution, the text will adjust with it. So it's not tied to the resolution of your image, in other words. And it is vector-based text in Photoshop, which is good. But you'll still probably find that you should do most of your text in InDesign. So maybe we can bring that little bit across and so then, especially for things that are outside the images, of course, much easier to do that just in InDesign. But again, the fonts are the main problem with Windows. So any of you with a Mac, you'd know that the basic font selection is far better than Windows. You have Helvetica and I think Futura. Anyone who's got a Mac, you get Futura still on your Apple computers? Anyone? Anyhow, I love Futura. I use Futura for everything, pretty much. Futura and Helvetica.
I don't get Futura.
Oh, you don't? Oh, okay. You used to. Oh, right.
I just have it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. Oh, you don't? Right. Okay, I thought you did. Yeah, I just assumed it was there because I've seen it so many times, but maybe it's not. Yeah.
And I always use Simple Gothic.
Yes,
body
yeah,
text, and that doesn't come with it.
Oh, it doesn't? Right. Oh, okay, because you get that in Windows. Okay, that's one thing Windows has that Apple doesn't for once. Amazing. Yeah, so you get Century Gothic there. So, amazing, yeah. Because, so Helvetica though, that's the big one that Apple's always had that Windows never has given by default, yeah. And Helvetica, that's the big, trendy font to a lot of people, I suppose.
Yeah. I think you only get like the basic fonts.
Oh, right. Oh, okay, right. Okay, well then you should just definitely get your own.
Yeah.
And so Helvetica's an easy one to find. I've paid for some of those over the years, and then I found that the free ones that I found later were better than the paid ones. So, yeah, I couldn't tell you how many. I've got literally hundreds of Helvetica fonts that I've built up, and then, but Futura, I love Futura, and, but just do your own research and decide on fonts you like, and don't just settle for the ones that come with either Windows or Apple, by the sound of it. So again, as you make text with InDesign, again, you will get more options than a lot of the other Windows programs, but you still want to look at adding your own. And something you can just search for. I'd recommend avoid this typekit thing. Maybe some people get use out of it, but I've found that it's easier to just go and find the fonts independently. And this typekit seems to have more fonts made by other users and people who are just playing around, or maybe they're graphic designers, and graphic designers do make fonts for a living, but they're kind of new, weird fonts. I haven't really had much luck with that, but you might, I don't know, have a look at it. But that typekit, is there to give you different fonts, but again, just search and you'll find you can definitely get a lot of the major fonts without using that. And so maybe I can just quickly show you, we can't do it on these computers, but I can show you where it goes in Windows. You just go to the Windows folder and then find the fonts folder. And so then you just copy the files that you've downloaded. There should be TTF files. You just copy them into this folder, and that installs the fonts on your computer. Here we go, finally typekit's opening. And look, I may be wrong, it might have some good stuff in typekit, but again, I've only had a quick look at it and I didn't really like most of the things I saw. But maybe it's got, most of it I couldn't find the old old-fashioned fonts that I really like. But you have a look at it, and, you know, you can go forever with fonts if you're interested in graphic design. It's a huge part of that. So again, text, really important thing you can do with InDesign. It works like Word and most other programs in that you set the size in points. So if we look at that text there, you'll see the size comes up here in points. And I've looked this up so many times, but I still have to look it up to know what size a point is. So let's just bring it up again. It's good to know. So how big is a point? There it is. So 0.35 millimeters. And so what would that be? About 2.8 is what it says there. Is that right? Yeah, 2.8 points to a millimetre. So roughly 3, I suppose. So if you think of 3 points to a mil, so if you want text that's you know, the same size as, let's say, 3 mil text from Revit, that's going to be about 9 points. But again, it's not in exact millimetre increments because it's an old imperial unit. That's one thing that annoys me actually, that, you know, we're stuck using points in most programs. Again, Word, InDesign, Photoshop all generally use points for text, but it's an imperial measurement based on inches. Or is it? No, so it's an imperial measurement, but it's not even an exact inch. So I don't know where they got it from. Yeah, but anyhow, that's how it is with imperial things. But we have to go with it. So again, text. Other than that, very easy in InDesign, and you find the options for setting the spacing of the text if you're interested in that. Really advanced. You get to that on the window menu with there's the type, and the paragraph, character and the paragraph windows are probably the main ones used to adjust the text further. So it's under types and tables there under window, and then you've got character that set all the options for the characters themselves, and then again under window, types and tables, or type and tables, you've got paragraph for setting the paragraph options. You don't always need to have to use those, but again, if you want to adjust things like the kerning and the spacing between the text and the paragraph lines as well, you've got all that control. Let's close those, and then maybe the other thing to watch out for text if you haven't used InDesign at all. I'll just type in a bit more and try and go to the edge of this frame. More. Obviously a bit around the text. I'm still going, but we can't see it anymore because I've hit the edge of that frame. So to see it, I've got to then extend that frame so that I can see everything I've typed. So that's probably a difficult thing or thing to watch out for with InDesign text, and otherwise works very similar to Photoshop text. So those are the main things you tend to do with InDesign. So the final thing I'll show you then is a really good tip that a graphic designer gave me many years ago. If you know that you want your image to fit within a certain size or a frame, make the frame first. And so there you can see I've got the this rectangular frame tool. I'm just going to click and drag to make my frame where I want the image to go, and you can almost do a lot of your layout in advance before you even have the content to go into those frames. You just work out your general pattern, and then you can even start working on the text and the other things while you're getting your renders and the other things you're going to insert together. And so now, hopefully, if I go back to Revit, my render's done. So I'll export that and go to save it, same place. Line up there. So I'll spin here. Okay, so just quickly, I'll close that rendering dialog box just so I can quickly show you again. Clicking on the border there, when we go to size crop, that's where you can again type in the width and the height, and you've got the scale option. If you only want to change the size and you don't want to change the view itself. So maybe I'll show you what will happen if I change it with field of view, and then I'll change the height to, let's say, 140. Oops. And then you'll see the width won't change. So we can change non-proportionally, in other words. And it's like we're stretching the sides. So when I click OK, you'll see the top and the bottom will come in. There we are. But the sides haven't changed. So it's adjusting the view, in other words. I'll undo that, and then I'll select the frame again, and then go back to size crop, and this time change it to scale lock proportions, and then I'll change the height to 140 again, and this time you'll see the width will change. So that's done. Just check that. Yep, that's done. So the image hasn't changed. The view itself hasn't changed, so. But when I go back to the render settings, you'll see that the width and the height there are different, which means in total we've got less pixels because that resolution is spread out over a smaller area. So I'll then just open that render in Photoshop. Okay, so now I can continue doing work on the render here, and some common things I would be doing to adjust this, aside from adding in maybe more people and overlaying things. I'll put in a background, and I'll just get something from there. Oh, I put it there. Sorry, it's in the other one. Where did I save it? Me. That's not there. I had it just a second ago. Yeah, maybe I'll just get another background. So I'll go into the P5 and just get something. Well, let's have it looking out to outside, so I'll get this. Okay, so I've got my background, and I'm just going to select all, edit, copy. There are many ways of moving layers from one file to another, but this is quick and easy. So I've selected it, copied it. Now I'll go back to my file with the render, and I'll just paste it in there. You can see it's sitting over the top. No problem. I'm going to go to edit. Just show you again the free transform tool there. Control T is the shortcut, and then I can stretch it by holding down Shift to keep it with lock proportions. And to finish, you can either double click or click the tick up the top to finish. And then to put that behind my render, I'm simply going to drag that layer underneath, and there we are. So, so I've just clicked and dragged to move my my background, but I forgot that I was on the render layer, so I'll just make sure I switch it to the background layer, and now I can, oops, sorry, it's one other option. When you use that moving tool, it should usually work with the layer that's selected, but you've got to make sure that this auto select option at the top is turned off, otherwise it's going to select whatever you click on. I've turned that auto select off, and now I can click and drag and just move the background. I'll get a better background later, but for now that'll do. And so, maybe just to do one other adjustment, I'll go to the image menu and adjustments and just do a photo filter to change the temperature of that render. It's a bit warm, so I'm going to put a cooling filter on just to cool it down a bit. And then adjusting the density there, we can fine tune that slightly. There we go, that'll do. Okay, so obviously we'll take that a lot further in the end, but for now I'll just save that as a new Photoshop file. I don't even need to change the name here because the original file was a different format. So I can keep render perspective as my name and just save it as a PSD file. And then if I go to InDesign, I'm going to check the frame size. So you can see there that my frame, when I select it, will give me the size in millimetres up here. You can see as we adjust that, the width and the height, of course, are changing. So it's 213 by 151. I might have just typed in that exactly. So I'll round it off and make it 210 and 150. So now back into Photoshop, I'll go to the image menu and then again image size, and you can see there, this is where it's really going to help you to understand resolution, because we know in Revit it was set to 300 dpi. But what's happened when we open it in Photoshop? It's no longer 300 dpi. So we want to be working with 300 dpi, but I'm not going to change it straight away, because if I change it there to 300 dpi, notice it's got resample turned on. So what's it going to do? Well, exactly, yeah, it's going to increase the pixels. So if I change that to 300, notice how the image size has blown out, it's really ballooned out from 16 meg to 288 meg. So we're going to have a massive file, and for no benefit. It's not going to look any better. So I'll cancel that, go back to image and then image size, and I'm going to turn resample off. Then I'm going to change it to 300. And now notice the size in millimetres is exactly what it was set to in Revit. Now I've changed it since in there, so I'll just undo back so you can see what it was. There we are. So that's how it was originally. When I rendered it, it was 260 mil by 160 mil at 300 dpi. So now that I've changed it to 300 dpi, we've got those same values for the width and the height. So the render was correct. It was the right size, but again, programs like this, Photoshop and rendering programs, tend to use the pixel dimensions rather than always setting the size in millimetres and using a resolution. And so effectively what happens technically is that it defaults back to the screen resolution, which used to be 72 dpi. That's where the 72 comes from. But there's no problem changing that. It doesn't affect the image at all. It's just so that we can see the measurements in the format we need. So that's a really helpful thing, understanding when to use resample and when to not use it. I'll click OK. The image has not changed, but now when I go back to image and then image size again, I've got my measurements there coming up correctly. And then I can take it further, so coming back to the InDesign frame, so it's 210 by 150. It didn't. Yeah, if you turn resample off, it won't change. Yeah, that's the whole idea, yeah. So it just changes the way it's going to show the measurements. Basically, yeah, yeah. Unless you're adjusting the proportions. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, that's right. The file size won't change. Yeah. So now, so again, I keep forgetting the size. So it was 150 across. So now I'm going to turn resample back on. It's only a slight change, but it's worth doing. So it's 150 by what was the height again? 210. So I'm going to change this to 150, and then you can see that the width ends up being 243. I just need to live with that. I'm happy for that to be like that. So I'll click OK. And this time it has changed the file size. And so then you've got an option. You can either just bring it in like that and let InDesign do the cropping, or you can use canvas size to crop it in Photoshop. It's up to you. So if you think you might need to adjust it further later and bring back the sides, do it in InDesign. But if you don't think you'll need to do that, do it in Photoshop. So if we go to image and then canvas size, you can see there it's in inches, of course, because Americans. So I'm going to change that to centimetres. And so canvas size is different to image size. It will crop your images. So if I change the width there to 10, wasn't it? Yeah. Yep. So I'll make that 21 centimetres, which is 210 millimetres. Okay, and it's going to tell me it'll crop it. So I'll proceed, and so that would fit perfectly into my frame. I'll undo that, and so instead I'm just going to save it with the sides now, the width wider than it needs to be, but that's okay, because I can then, while that frame's selected, this time go again, File, Place. But the difference here between what I did with the section and this time is that the frame is selected. And there is my Photoshop file, render perspective, and it places it exactly into the frame. But we know we've got the sides there, so if I stretch that frame out, it's there. Photoshop. Yeah. No, none of that. Yeah, I know, it's an old habit of flattening before you bring it into InDesign, but you don't have to do it anymore. Not for ages, actually. Yeah. And it's much better because, these are ongoing processes that you're going to keep adjusting. You're going to keep working on your layouts. And it's a really good process to get used to, setting the layout up at an early stage in your design process. And then you can show people, draft renders and draft, layouts. And then as you develop your design up further, then you can keep updating it. Yep. And then also, it gives you a really clear idea where you need to do the work. Because you'll find yourself sometimes just modelling away in 3D in Revit and modelling things that might be, behind a column or behind the shelves or something here that no one's ever going to see. And you'll know when you put this all together on the layout, there's no point working on those areas. If they're not going to be seen in your final layout, what's the point of doing that work? But when you're just thinking about it in Revit and you don't go to the end of the process and set up that layout that is the thing you're really working towards producing in the end, it gives you maybe the wrong idea about where you should be doing all the work. So it helps in a lot of ways to go all the way through to the end of the process, set your layouts up well before you finish your designs, and then just keep progressively updating it, and with that linked workflow. So here maybe I'll decide, well, that background doesn't make sense, so let's turn it off, and save the file, and then back into InDesign. All I've got to do is update. There we are. So so that's it, and so hopefully that'll give you a good idea more about Photoshop and understanding resolution, and then tying that together then with the final way you're going to be using these images that have a resolution and get put together with InDesign. So the next thing I was planning on looking at, I won't do it now of course, but after this, I want to look at going further with rendering. So here you can see we've rendered a section in 3D, and then I've overlaid the line work. But then the other thing you've got to remember, in Photoshop you can do a lot of the rendering there as well. So using all the great tools you've got for painting, and the brush tool, and lots of other, clone stamp and gradients and all sorts of things you can use to just paint in your own textures. And so I'll show you some good options you can use to get things like plan drawings out of Revit, mostly just as line work, and then do a lot of the rendering in Photoshop, and then again lay those out with InDesign. And then the final thing I'll say there, the reason I wanted to point that out is because some people will also do the rendering in programs like InDesign, or the other alternative would be Illustrator. So if you need to do rendering in a certain way, I won't go too far into it right now, but there are definitely good options for rendering in those programs as well, using more of a vector-based approach. You know what I mean? Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, we'll keep going with Revit as well, but yeah, definitely doing more of the graphics from now on. And it's really important, especially for interior design and decoration. You're expected to be able to produce more graphical presentations than technical drawings all the time. So what's one other thing I was going to say? Oh yes, patterns, that's right. So patterns in Photoshop are actually great. And so when you start doing rendering, if you want to work ahead to this, you've got great options for making and working with patterns in Photoshop they're excellent. There's nothing wrong with those, and you can do great things. But you can take that idea much further in, I was going to say InDesign, but InDesign's okay, but Illustrator is the one that I would use if you really want to get into doing patterns. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so think about that, because patterns, of course, can be used to create your materials and lots of other things for your presentation layouts in these graphics programs, and it's a great thing to work with. So I'll go through that later, but that should be enough to get you going with both Photoshop and InDesign.